The moment I realized I was at the wrong wedding, I should have stood up and left. Any normal person would have quietly slipped out the back doors, found their car, and driven to the correct venue before anyone noticed. Instead, I stayed seated beside a smiling old woman in lavender silk, lied directly to her face, accidentally became part of a stranger's wedding photos, and somehow met the woman I would eventually marry. Even now, years later, it still sounds fake when I tell people the story. It started on a Saturday afternoon when I was supposed to attend my college roommate Tyler's wedding at the Riverside Hotel downtown. I had been running late all morning because I overslept after a brutal work week, and by the time I finally got dressed and headed out the door, I was already stressed. My GPS kept rerouting me because of construction, and I barely paid attention to where it was taking me. I just followed the voice directions while mentally rehearsing the apology I planned to give Tyler for arriving late. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, I pulled into the parking lot of a massive property called the Ashford Manor Estate. The place looked expensive in the kind of way that made you immediately sit up straighter when you stepped out of your car. There were fountains near the entrance, rows of white roses lining the walkway, and valets hurrying around in black suits. I remember thinking Tyler must have spent a fortune on the venue. People in formal clothes were streaming inside, so I followed them without hesitation. I signed the guest book near the entrance without even reading the names at the top and walked straight into a ballroom where soft piano music floated through the air. The room was already half full, and ushers were guiding late arrivals toward empty seats. I found one near the middle row and sat down just as someone handed me a folded ceremony program. That was the exact moment my stomach dropped. Across the front, in elegant gold lettering, it read, "Celebrating the marriage of Charlotte and Daniel." I stared at it for several seconds like the words might magically rearrange themselves into names I recognized. My roommate's name was Tyler. He was marrying a woman named Brooke. I slowly looked around the room and realized I did not recognize a single face anywhere. Not one. A rush of panic climbed straight into my throat. I should have left right then. Seriously, that was the obvious solution. Quietly stand up, slip out, pretend nothing happened. But before I could move, an older woman lowered herself into the seat beside me with a warm smile. She wore a lavender dress covered in tiny pearls, and she looked like the type of person who called everyone sweetheart after knowing them for 30 seconds. She leaned toward me kindly. Bride's side or groom's side? My brain completely locked up. For one horrible second, I considered telling her the truth, but embarrassment hit faster than logic. Groom's side? I heard myself say old friend from work. The lie came out so naturally that it scared me a little. Her face brightened immediately. "Oh, how wonderful. Daniel always talks about how much he loved his old team. I'm Charlotte's Aunt Margaret." I forced a smile while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Ethan," I said, "great to meet you." I had no idea why I kept going with the lie. Maybe because admitting I accidentally walked into a stranger's wedding felt humiliating. Maybe because the ceremony was about to start and leaving suddenly would attract attention. Or maybe because once you tell one stupid lie, your brain starts convincing you the easiest thing to do is keep digging. Margaret happily launched into stories about the bride and groom while I nodded like I belonged there. Meanwhile, my entire focus stayed fixed on the side exit near the stage. I figured I would wait until everyone stood during the vows, then quietly disappear. Simple plan. Then she walked in. She came rushing through the ballroom doors looking completely frazzled, like the universe had personally declared war on her that morning. Her dark brown hair was pinned up loosely, with strands falling around her face like she had fixed it in a moving car. Her navy blue dress was elegant but clearly thrown on in a hurry, and she clutched her purse while scanning the room in mild panic. Her eyes landed on the empty seat beside me. She hurried over and slipped into it seconds before the music changed. "Thank God," she whispered under her breath. "This day has been a complete disaster." I nodded sympathetically while secretly wondering if she belonged there any more than I did. Then Margaret leaned toward her with the same friendly smile. "Bride's side or groom's side, dear?" The woman froze. I saw it happen instantly. That exact same panic. That exact same calculation. "Groom's side," she said quickly, "old friend from work." I turned and stared at her. She stared back at me. And in that single moment, we both knew. Neither of us belonged there. Margaret clapped her hands softly. "Oh, wonderful. Ethan here also worked with Daniel." The woman bit her lip to stop herself from laughing. Of course he did. The ceremony started before either of us could say another word. Music filled the ballroom as the wedding party walked down the aisle, and suddenly escaping became impossible without causing a scene. The woman beside me kept nervously smoothing the folded edges of her program while her leg bounced anxiously beneath her dress. Every few seconds she glanced toward the exit, then at me, then back toward the altar. I was doing the exact same thing. We were trapped together in silent mutual panic. Oddly enough, once the ceremony truly began, something changed. Despite the absurdity of the situation, it was actually beautiful. Charlotte cried during her vows. Daniel's voice cracked while promising to love her for the rest of his life. Even the officiant somehow sounded genuine instead of rehearsed. At one point he said that love often appears when people least expect it, in places they never planned to be. The woman beside me let out the tiniest snort of laughter. I glanced sideways and saw her covering her mouth while trying not to lose it completely. That nearly broke me too. By the time the ceremony ended, we had somehow survived 40 minutes inside a situation that should never have happened. Guests began standing and moving toward the cocktail reception in the adjoining ballroom. The second the aisle cleared, the woman grabbed my sleeve. "We need to leave immediately." "Absolutely," I whispered back. We turned toward the exit together. Then Margaret intercepted us like a cheerful assassin. "There you two are. Come on, sweetheart. The photographer is organizing family and friends pictures." My soul physically left my body. "Oh, we really should not intrude," the woman said quickly. "Nonsense," Margaret replied. "Daniel will be thrilled his old co-workers came." Before either of us could escape, we were swept into a massive crowd gathering for wedding photos. The photographer arranged people in rows while shouting instructions. "Bride's college friends over here. Groom's co-workers in the back row. Immediate family center." The woman and I exchanged a look of pure horror. 5 minutes later, we stood together in the back row of a stranger's wedding portrait pretending we belonged there while a photographer snapped multiple pictures. Somewhere in the world, there are framed wedding photos featuring two completely random people who accidentally wandered in off the street. After the photos finally ended, we escaped toward the cocktail reception entrance like fugitives. The woman exhaled heavily. "Okay, we are officially insane." I laughed for the first time all day. "I'm Ethan, by the way." "Sophia," she replied, "and I was supposed to be at the Riverside Hotel 20 minutes ago." I stopped walking. "Wait, seriously?" She nodded. "My cousin's wedding. You too." "My roommate's wedding." I followed my GPS without paying attention and somehow ended up here. She stared at me for a second before bursting into laughter. Real laughter. The kind you cannot fake. Her eyes crinkled at the corners and suddenly my entire disastrous afternoon felt weirdly worth it. "I told the exact same lie you did," she admitted. "Old friend from work. You copied me. You inspired me." We stood there grinning at each other like complete idiots. "We should leave," she said finally. "Definitely." Neither of us moved. Then she glanced toward the cocktail room where servers carried trays of appetizers through the crowd. Although, she added carefully, it would probably be rude to waste all that food. Exactly what I was thinking. And just like that, we accidentally became wedding crashers. The cocktail hour turned into one of the funniest experiences of my life. Sophia and I stayed close together because we were the only two people who knew the truth. Every conversation felt like navigating a minefield. Guests constantly approached us asking how we knew the couple, and somehow we kept improvising answers that became increasingly ridiculous. At one point, a man in suspenders asked where exactly we had worked with Daniel. My brain went completely blank. Sophia answered instantly. "Consulting firm downtown. The Morrison account nearly killed all of us." The man groaned dramatically. "Consulting work is brutal." We nodded with fake exhaustion like veterans revisiting wartime memories. The second he walked away, I stared at her. "The Morrison account. First thing that came to mind. You're terrifyingly good at lying under pressure." She smirked. "You're terrifyingly bad at it." The appetizers were incredible. Tiny crab cakes, bacon-wrapped dates, miniature beef pastries that practically melted in your mouth. Sophia and I camped near the bar while quietly trying to avoid Margaret, who seemed determined to introduce us to every living relative in attendance. Somehow, the longer we stayed, the more natural it felt. We found a small table in the corner and started actually talking. Real conversations, not fake wedding lies. She worked as a graphic designer for a publishing company. She hated olives with irrational passion. She once got stranded overnight in Nebraska because she boarded the wrong train after falling asleep. Every story she told somehow became hilarious because of the way she reacted to her own chaos. And the more she laughed, the more I realized I did not want the day to end. At one point she tilted her head and studied me. So why exactly didn't you leave the second you realized this wasn't your wedding? Honestly, yeah, because I was embarrassed. And then you showed up and made the situation funny instead of horrifying. Her expression softened slightly. I almost left too, but then I saw you panic lying to Margaret and figured if someone else was trapped here, maybe I could survive it too. That should have been the moment I realized something important was happening between us. Instead, we kept accidentally spiraling deeper into the insanity. We stayed for dinner. I still cannot explain why. Dinner was plated salmon with roasted vegetables and fancy wine I definitely did not deserve to drink. We ended up seated at a table full of actual friends of the groom, which forced Sophia and me into creating increasingly elaborate fake backstories. Apparently Daniel once spilled coffee on an important client during a presentation. Apparently all of us survived a nightmare business trip together in Chicago. Apparently we had all worked 80-hour weeks on projects none of us understood. The lies became collaborative storytelling. At one point Sophia leaned close and whispered, "If we get arrested after this, I'm blaming you." Fair. The reception became louder and warmer as the night went on. Music echoed across the ballroom while people danced under hanging lights. Charlotte and Daniel looked genuinely happy together, and somehow that made the whole situation feel strangely wholesome instead of terrible. Eventually the DJ switched to slow songs. Sophia watched couples moving across the dance floor with a thoughtful expression. Without really thinking, I held out my hand. "Dance with me? At a stranger's wedding? We've already committed every other bad decision possible." She laughed softly before placing her hand in mine. "Okay, but if security throws us out, I'm sprinting faster than you." We stepped onto the dance floor surrounded by people celebrating a marriage neither of us had anything to do with. And somehow it felt perfect. I placed my hand gently against her waist while she rested hers on my shoulder. We swayed slowly beneath glowing lights while music hummed around us. "This has to be the weirdest first date in human history," she said. "Is this a date? What else would you call 7 hours of organized fraud?" I laughed so hard I nearly stepped on her foot. The crazy thing was that dancing with her felt easy, natural, like I had known her longer than a few hours. Conversation flowed effortlessly between us, and every time she smiled at me, my chest tightened in a way I had not felt in years. By 9 o'clock, reality finally crashed back down on us. I checked my phone and nearly choked. 7 missed calls from Tyler. 3 texts. "Where are you? Dude, seriously, where did you go? Are you alive?" Sophia looked at her own phone and winced. "My cousin thinks I died on the interstate. We are horrible people. Objectively terrible. We probably should leave now." Yeah, this time, we actually meant it. We walked toward the ballroom exit together while the music faded behind us. Just before we reached the doors, Margaret appeared again like some kind of magical final boss. "Leaving already? Early morning tomorrow," I said quickly. Margaret smiled warmly before unexpectedly pulling both of us into hugs. "It was lovely meeting you both. And for the record, you make a beautiful couple." Sophia immediately shook her head. "Oh no, we're not. Just friends," I finished awkwardly. Margaret gave us a look that said she absolutely did not believe us. Outside, the night air felt cool and surreal after hours inside the glowing ballroom. We stood beside the parking lot under strings of lights wrapped around the trees. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It suddenly hit me that this bizarre accidental connection could simply end right there. We could get in our cars, drive away, and become nothing more than a weird story each other told at parties someday. I really did not want that. Sophia shifted slightly. "Well, this happened." "Yeah, it definitely happened." Another silence. Then she pulled out her phone. "Can I get your number? You know, in case we need matching witness statements for our crimes." I laughed and handed her my phone. She typed her number in and immediately sent herself a text. The message read, "Proof we survived the wrong wedding." I stared at the screen smiling like an idiot. "Drive safe, wedding crasher," she said. "You too." I watched her walk toward a silver sedan near the far end of the parking lot. Before getting inside, she turned around and waved once. That tiny wave stayed in my head the entire drive home. Tyler called me the second I finally texted him back. "Where the hell were you?" I told him the partial truth. I accidentally went to the wrong venue. He laughed so hard he could barely breathe. "You're kidding." I wish I was. But even while he described the ceremony and reception I had missed, my thoughts kept drifting back to Sophia. Her laugh, her sarcasm, the way she looked at me during that dance. By the time I got home, I already had a text waiting. "Did you survive your friend's murder attempt?" "Barely. You? I claimed family emergency. I'm probably cursed now. We texted for hours that night, then the next day, then every day after that. A week later we met for coffee at an actual location we were both supposed to be at. 2 weeks later we had dinner. After that came movies, late night phone calls, bookstore dates, long drives with no destination, and eventually the kind of comfort that sneaks up on you before you realize your life has quietly rearranged itself around another person. Tyler eventually heard the full story and declared it the funniest thing any human being had ever done. 3 months later, Sophia tracked down Charlotte and Daniel online. I sent them a wedding gift, she admitted one night while showing me her phone. You did what? A nice wine set, with an apology note. Apparently Charlotte responded immediately because she thought the entire story was hilarious. Instead of being angry, she invited us to their anniversary party the following year. Only you could turn accidental wedding crashing into networking, I told Sophia. She looked at me over her coffee cup with that same smile I first saw at the reception. Only you would stay at the wrong wedding long enough to meet your future girlfriend. 6 months after we met, we were celebrating my birthday at a small Italian restaurant downtown when Sophia suddenly grew quiet. She looked at me carefully. Do you ever think maybe some mistakes are supposed to happen? I smiled slightly. That depends. Are we talking philosophical mistakes or criminal trespassing mistakes? I'm serious. I reached for her hand across the table. Okay, serious answer. She squeezed my fingers gently. We were both supposed to be somewhere else that day. Different people, different weddings, different lives. But somehow we made the exact same mistake at the exact same time. What are the odds of that? Pretty low. Exactly. I think something wanted us to meet. I leaned back smiling. So the universe intentionally turned us into accidental wedding crashers. She nodded thoughtfully. Apparently the universe had to work around the fact that we're both disasters. I laughed quietly before lifting her hand to my lips. Best disaster that ever happened to me. 1 year after the wrong wedding, Sophia and I attended Charlotte and Daniel's anniversary party. This time we actually belonged there. The second we walked in, Charlotte pointed dramatically. The legendary wedding crashers. Daniel laughed and hugged both of us. You're permanently in our wedding album, by the way. They had even framed one of the photos from the ceremony. Sure enough, Sophia and I stood awkwardly in the back row pretending we belonged there. A tiny plaque underneath read, "The Beginning." That night, we told our story over and over while people laughed until they cried. Somehow every retelling made the whole thing feel even more unbelievable. Toward the end of the evening, Charlotte pulled me aside quietly. Can I tell you something weird? Sure. The morning of my wedding, I was terrified. I kept wondering if I was making the wrong choice. Then during the ceremony I noticed two people in the crowd I didn't recognize. You and Sophia. Somehow it comforted me. It reminded me that life is unpredictable, and love doesn't always arrive the way you expect it to. I looked across the room toward Sophia, who was laughing at something Daniel said. Yeah, I said softly. I think that's true. 2 years after we accidentally met, I brought Sophia back to the Ashford Manor estate, specifically the parking lot. She stared at me suspiciously as we stood beneath the same glowing trees where we had first said goodbye. Why are we here? Because this is where my life changed. Her expression shifted instantly. Oh my God. I got down on one knee right there in the parking lot where we had once stood as two awkward strangers trying to process the weirdest day of our lives. Sophia started laughing and crying at the same time. You're proposing in a parking lot. Technically, I said, this is sacred ground. She covered her mouth while tears rolled down her cheeks. You are such an idiot. Yeah, but I'm your idiot. When I opened the ring box, she nodded before I could even finish speaking. Yes, obviously yes. Then she pointed a finger at me through tears. But our wedding better not be at the Riverside Hotel. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the ring. Deal. We got married the following spring. Tyler stood beside me as best man, grinning through the entire ceremony because he still thought the story was ridiculous. Charlotte and Daniel attended too, carrying the framed wedding photo from the day we first met. During my vows, I told everyone the truth. I told them about walking into the wrong ballroom, about the panic, the lies, the accidental dance, the 7 hours of chaos that somehow led me to the person I was always supposed to find. Sophia cried through most of her vows. She talked about fate, wrong turns, missed exits, broken routines. She talked about how sometimes life pushes you off the path you planned because something better is waiting somewhere else. At our reception, We danced to the same song that played during our first dance at Charlotte and Daniel's wedding. Halfway through the song, Sophia rested her head against my shoulder. Do you ever think about what would have happened if one of us had left early? All the time. And I kissed her forehead gently. I'm grateful we were both too awkward to make smart decisions. She laughed softly against my chest. Me too. And standing there surrounded by people who actually knew us, celebrating a love story born from confusion, panic, lies, and one very wrong wedding, I realized something that still stays with me now. Sometimes the worst directions of your life lead exactly where you were meant to go.